Just as an example, the organizers of this conference. This is not an organization per se, but we talk about the organization of the conference. The mobilization of resources to relieve people in China in the aftermath of the earthquake, or Katrina a few years back. We talk about the organization of the relief effort. It's not an entity as such, but it's the mobilization of different actors to generate an outcome. And I think this is probably what Barbara meant by connecting, reconnecting, disconnected different actors in the network. So it is in that sense that I use organization rather than just purely organizing. Now, my view is this, and I want to offer you this a brief overview of my argument, and then I will unpack each one of these three poles here. Now, I would argue that we've got to go back to the ontological basis of organization. What do I mean by this? The following. Given our experience of the world, what must organization be like? We don't live in a chaotic world. We live in a world in which there's stability, regularity, and some predictability. But it's not all there is. There is more than that. We live in a world of change, innovation, creation. New things also emerge. So how can we reconcile, given our experience, and this is the phenomenologist in me now speaking, given our experience, what must organization be like? And I would argue it is the following three ontological components. These are not perspectives. These are ontological layers or components. Now, the first, there's no hierarchy here. It's just I'm describing each one of them. One is representation. Organization is about abstraction, labeling, codification, representation. It's bringing the world forward through the labeling and the communication that we use. And Jim has done a lot of work, and with Elizabeth in their book, on acts of labeling and representing what is going on in the world. At the same time, I don't think we enter an organization as an abstract system. What we enter is very concrete human practices. Speaking as an academic, the university consists of a number of abstractions and generalizations and representations. But as an academic, I'm also part of the human system of the practices in which exist in my particular university and of which I'm a member of. So we've got to make room for practices as distinct from representations. But you've got to have both. If you have only abstraction, you cannot have proper organization. If you have only practices, you cannot have enduring systems. But again, this is not enough, because ultimately you've got to have action. It is practices and representations and practices are instantiated in a world, in the real world, in an open-ended world in which we encounter new problems, different contexts from the ones we imagined or we represented in our canonical images, and we've got to take care of. And so we act. And in an open world, new things come about. And the three things are connected, at least to my mind. And if you see any gaps and contradictions, please do let me know. But I do see these three things as connected. You cannot have organization without representation, but you cannot have organization without practices and without action or interaction. And it is these three ontological layers I want to unpack a little bit for the rest of my talk. Now, you may have noticed this, one of those phrases which I never dare say in public, except for these highly esoteric meetings like this one, that the organization is a process of ensemblization of magmatic being. You know, this must be a forbidden phrase for anybody else outside highly selected groups of people. But I feel I can use this highly esoteric language here. Now, the idea of magma comes from Castoriadis, a French-Greek philosopher, and which I find it quite useful. For Castoriadis, magma is that from which organization emerges. That from which we can extract an indefinite number of ensemblist organizations, but which can never be reconstituted by a finite or infinite ensemblist composition of these organizations. In other words, hopefully in plain English, it is something like this. Magma is formlessness, is an abyss. is something being cannot be defined once and for all, cannot be defined, cannot be determined. But we do make attempts at determining being. And you can see here the language ensemblist. It comes from set theory, which Castoriadis developed in his own philosophical thinking. So the idea is that we can, whatever magma is, whatever being is, whatever this formlessness in which we inhabit is, we try to make sense of it. We try to ensemblize it, to constitute it as a set and as an organization. And this is an incessant process. Without this process, there cannot be enduring features of an organized world. But at the same time, this is a perennially incomplete process. And this is what I will try to explain now. Now, take the first one, the first component, organization as representation. Here it is, I think this is fairly well established now, that when we, in organized systems, when we organize human activities, what we do, we abstract them, we codify them, and we generalize. So the idea of representation is very, very important here, and it is this kind of what Castoriadis calls ensemblistic identitarian logic. That is, it is the logic which we mark things out, we define things, even temporarily, we distinguish things, we label things, so that we can properly represent them, and then we can take action with these things. Now, this is about logic. It is the logic of any abstract system. And in any abstract system, it is the syntax of the system which is important here. Again, as a sort of possibly, as an example, if you take the organization of this conference, I think Francois and his colleagues, they had in mind probably what we may call a canonical image of what it is to be a conference delegate. There was a representation of what it is. There are certain representations which were brought together in the form of rules and roles that we enact in this conference. And I think this is true of any organized effort in which we participate. There are representations for activities, there's an abstraction of what we do, and then there's and the possibility of constructing rules whereby we can relate types of actions to types of events. So ultimately, when we organize, when we represent, organize in that sense, human activities, we come up with generalizations, connecting certain types of events to certain types of outcomes. So to sum up here, it is about using categories and abstract categories to be able to create some kind of closure in the system, to fix these categories insofar as we can, so that we can create some predictability and recurrent patterns. If we do not have any recurrent patterns, the world cannot be an organized world. Organization implies generalization, recurrent behavior. And that is why rules are important, formal rules are important in organized systems. But rules consist of two things. One is factual predicates, if X, and then consequence, which describe consequences, then Y. But rules also are underlain by justifications. So if you take the ethnographic research, for example, of Julian Orr, in his study of the Xerox for the corporate technicians, you will see that there were plenty of canonical rules issued by the company as to how these people ought to behave to repair the machines, typically of the if X then Y type. And there was the implicit justification that with these rules, then you will be better able and more efficiently able to serve the customer. But rules are incomplete, and they are incomplete because they are imperfect generalizations. In the real world, no matter how well organized in this sense, how well you have represented, abstracted, and codified a particular practice, the instantiation of rules always take place in open systems, in open contexts. And that in itself creates new possibilities for action which cannot be contained in the rules themselves. Orr documents this very nicely. All these manuals photocopier technicians use